Varkas, the leader of the Black Hounds, barked out some orders, and his people immediately began to move. Around 20 of the cavalrymen who had come with him surrounded the burned bandit camp while the rest went inside to see what had happened. The fire that had been started was now out, though a few glowing embers still remained. "This looks like more than a simple investigation," Alexander said as he watched with Rusty while the mercenaries searched the camp. "Was there something in that treasure chest they could want?" Rusty asked his guides while opening his system window. Inside his storage, he could not examine the contents clearly, since it appeared only as a box with a broken lock. He had noticed some papers inside, so it was possible. "Perhaps, but it is more likely they are here to finish off any survivors. That is quite standard for villains like this," Alexander added, believing their purpose was different. In his view, they were eliminating loose ends and killing anyone who might testify against the merchants or the nobles in the settlement. "Oh, why are they doing that?" Rusty asked, to which Alexander replied. "To see if anyone is hiding or pretending to be dead." It reminded Rusty of the battle against the orcs, when after the fighting ended, people went around piercing the bodies of the monsters with spears. They were doing the same now, making sure everyone was truly dead. Yet from what Rusty understood, the bandits were supposed to be allied with the mercenaries. The more time he spent among humanoids, the less he understood how they operated. Some were driven by family and comfort, while others were consumed by greed and would kill anyone or anything that stood in their way. There were also the cunning ones who hid their true intentions, and those were the ones he disliked the most. Rusty watched through his puppet helmet from a distant treetop, completely still. The mercenaries worked with practiced efficiency, making it clear this was not their first time doing such a thing. They swept through the camp in groups, overturning ashes and stabbing even the charred corpses to confirm death. In a world filled with strange abilities, surviving being burned was not impossible. Their leader, Varkas, did not enter the camp. He sat on his armored horse, his dark coat swaying faintly in the wind, watching without showing the slightest concern for the survivors. In time, the men finished their search, and as expected, there were no survivors and no treasure left to claim. He and Gleam had already taken anything of value, and the prisoners who escaped had done the same before fleeing. One of the soldiers spoke after returning from the burned camp. Rusty's skill allowed him to see through his puppet armor helmet, but hearing was another matter. However, he could still piece together what the group was doing by watching their movements. They seemed to have realized that someone had escaped. Rusty knew there were two groups involved, the barbarians and the regular merchants. The barbarians had fled toward the mountains, while the merchants had gone in the opposite direction. It was likely that the merchants had learned about the bandits working with the nobles and decided to flee to another city ruled by someone else. Will they give chase? Probably. They have fast horses. If they go now, they could catch up to those merchants in half a day. Alexander replied. Can they make it to the next settlement? Rusty asked, knowing there were some villages and smaller cities in that direction. They might, if they do not make any stops along the way. A burden answered this time, and considering he knew the map of the area in detail, he was probably right. I see. It was clear that the mercenaries planned to chase the merchants rather than the group heading for the mountains. If any survivors reported to other nobles, there could be consequences, and their entire scheme might be exposed. Yet, knowing how the powerful operated, Rusty doubted anything would happen. Even if the captured merchants reached another city and told the truth, without solid evidence, nothing would likely be done. Will they leave a few people behind? Rusty wondered. The only reason he had decided to wait was to get some easy kills and more loot. The weapons and armor these mounted mercenaries used looked valuable, and he also wondered how strong they were. When he had been an E-rank monster, he would not have stood a chance against Varkas and his men. But what about now? From his hiding spot, he could see the mercenary leader speaking with a raised hand. It was easy to tell that he was ordering his forces to split into smaller groups. By their formation, it seemed that the largest group would pursue the merchants in the wagon they had escaped in, while the second group of 5 mounted riders would chase after the barbarian. However, the situation was not over yet, as 3 more people appeared to be heading back into the camp, probably to search it again in case they had missed something. A chance had presented itself, and Rusty now had an opportunity to eliminate a few of the mercenaries and perhaps gain enough experience to reach the next stage of his evolution. The mercenaries acknowledged the command with nods and began to move, but then Varkas did something unexpected. He raised his hand again to stop everyone, and one of the soldiers stepped forward and handed him a bow. Wasn't his weapon a sword? For a moment, Rusty was confused, but then he noticed an arrow aimed directly at his position. In the next instant, his skill was shattered as the arrow struck the helmet he had been using as an extra set of eyes. The arrow hit the helmet with a sharp clang, knocking it from the treetop post where Rusty had hidden it. Through his link, Rusty felt the sudden jolt as the puppet armor connection was forcibly severed. The double vision disappeared at once, and the world returned to normal. Varkas's arrow had hit dead center. The helmet tumbled into the bushes below, and one of the soldiers quickly moved to retrieve it. Rusty had been watching from a safer spot in another tree, with Gleam positioned even farther away. The moment the soldiers found his helmet, he blended into the shadows using his skill and stayed perfectly still. Some of them had entered the sparse forest, searching so thoroughly that he could hear their movements and voices nearby. Nothing here. It was just a helmet, probably something one of those drunk bandits tossed up there. The voices grew faint as they continued searching, but they never found his hiding spot. When they were done, they returned to their leader, who looked disappointed. He now held the helmet with the arrow still lodged through it. The force behind his shot was impressive, and Rusty realized that he might not be ready to face the mercenary leader in a real fight. The man's subordinates were not weak either. They were on the lower end of D rank, though likely still weaker than the instructor Rusty had faced back in the settlement. Once the group decided the helmet was nothing more than a leftover from some drunken bandits, they turned away and left. Rusty waited until he was sure that no one was watching and that Varkas was out of sight before he finally moved. That was close. It's a good thing I didn't attack them. Rusty knew he had grown stronger, but he was not confident he could defeat Varkas in direct combat. Comparing humanoids to monsters was difficult since their leveling systems differed, yet Varkas seemed close to C rank, though not quite there. Perhaps after his next evolution, Rusty could challenge him, but for now, he needed to stay cautious and survive. Now then, I should get those three first. Gleam, stay close but only attack after I do. Once the real danger had passed, everything else became much simpler. The remaining mercenaries did not seem very alert in their search, and they also looked exhausted. Although this group was far stronger than the ones he had seen back in the settlement, they were still well within his ability to defeat and much weaker than the bandit leader he had fought before. He barely needed to hide at all. Hey! He began the fight by leaping out from behind a pile of rubble and attacking one of the unsuspecting soldiers. His halberd cut through the man's leg before sweeping upward and striking his neck. The two others reacted quickly, but one of them was immediately hit by Gleam's ranged attacks. The battle did not last long. Rusty found it much easier than he had expected. His level was already over 20, and these soldiers only held simple classes. Soon, the camp fell silent again and, as before, he stripped them of their weapons and armor. Once they had been relieved of anything noteworthy, just like with the bandits, Rusty asked. Do I need to burn these guys too? Maybe dicing them up will be enough. Asking questions of someone with their head shattered is not easy. A burden cackled as Rusty wondered whether to set the three men on fire. If Varkas saw smoke and returned, he could foil Rusty's next plans. With a mace in hand, he began to mince the bodies and turned the three into unrecognizable messes. That should do it. Are you sure you do not want to become a demon lord, Rusty? A burden asked in an amused tone. The sight before them was quite gory. No. A burden seemed pleased with the carnage while Alexander remained quiet. When it was over, Rusty shifted into his smaller form that was not covered in blood and took off with Gleam. Let us go after those five. We should be able to reach them before they get to the barbarians. Finally, Rusty and Gleam left the bandit encampment and set out on their last mission. It was still bright outside, so they decided to fly higher than usual, hoping not to be noticed by the five mounted soldiers. After some time, they spotted the soldiers galloping through an open field not far from three barbarians who were running away. They didn't make it far. One was injured. Rusty said as he observed the barbarians. One of them was limping and leaning on the shoulders of the other two. They had not managed to get far from the camp, and even though the mountains were visible in the distance, they would never reach them before the five mountain warriors caught up. The barbarians, however, were in luck, for their savior had just arrived. Gleam, fly in front of them and gain some height. I want to try something. Just trust me on this. Gleam was not entirely sure about Rusty's plan, but she obeyed and climbed higher. Once she was a little ahead of the galloping mercenaries, Rusty leaped from her back. His form shifted into his massive Goliath frame, and the two axes he had taken from the bandit leader appeared in his hands as he descended rapidly. Now then, let's increase my weight. He activated his skills, increasing his weight as much as possible and braced for the impact. His descent was swift, and the mounted warriors never saw it coming. Rusty struck the ground with the force of a falling boulder. The impact cracked the earth and sent a shockwave that threw the horses into panic. Two mounts reared and tossed their riders before bolting in terror, while another was crushed completely at the moment of impact. A cloud of dust exploded outward as he hit the ground. His body took some damage from the fall, but he quickly used his SP to recover. Before the first mercenary could react, Rusty swung both axes forward and hurled them at the two men who had just fallen to the ground. One was instantly impaled, while the other managed to roll aside to avoid a fatal blow, though his arm was still caught by the sharp blade. These aren't that bad. He wore the bandit leader's gloves, called the weapons back to his hands, and prepared to strike again. Two men were already dead, 3 remained, and the real fight had just begun. Monster! One of the surviving riders shouted as he fumbled for a spear, but before he could act, a barrage of mana bolts flew toward him as Gleam provided support. Rusty had to admit that this way of fighting worked well. He distracted the enemies on the ground while Gleam attacked from a distance, forcing them to split their focus. Divided attention in battle often meant death, and soon another man fell. Only 2 remained. One of the remaining riders charged at him with a spear, while the other was attacked by Gleam, who fired from above. The man tried to shoot her down from horseback with his bow, but she bobbed and weaved through the air, easily avoiding every arrow. In return, she fired back with magical arrows made of pure mana. "Stay back, demon!" The other soldier lunged, but Rusty caught the spear shaft mid-strike. The wood groaned in his grip before splintering with a single twist. He stepped in close and swung his axe upward in a brutal arc. The mercenary barely managed to block with his short sword, but the force of the blow sent him staggering backward and tumbling off his mount. It was clear that the gap in power between them was too great. The man drew a second weapon, a mace, and tried to fight back, but Rusty barely reacted to the hits that landed. His body hardly flinched, and he didn't even need materials to repair himself. At his current level, these enemies were little more than walking experience points. Soon, the man fell beneath Rusty's weapon. "Congratulations, you have gained a level." Another surge of energy filled him, and his progress bar climbed even higher when Gleam struck down her own opponent with a devastating blast. Although she was not as strong as Rusty, her stats were still far above those of a typical D-rank human. The advantage of flight and magic was something that arrows alone could not overcome. Rusty stood among the fallen mercenaries and opened his status screen. He was close to his goal, only a few levels away from 25. A few more dungeon dives would be enough. After that, he would finally return to the Soul Forge to claim his new body and meet an old friend. "I wonder how she's doing," he said while picking up the weapons left behind. In the distance, the 3 barbarians watched him for a moment before turning to flee. He let them go. Their strength was far below his, not even worth the effort. With this battle finished, his current mission was complete, and it was time to expand his abilities even further. "Have you heard?" asked a man holding a tankard filled with watered-down ale, his elbows resting on the scarred wooden table. The tavern was half full, and the smell of roasted meat mixed with the aroma of sweaty men. "Yeah, someone said that the bandit camp vanished, burned to a crisp. Serves them right." The man across from him answered. He was a rough-looking fellow with an eye patch hiding one eye and a deep scar running down the other side of his face. He grinned, revealing yellowed teeth with several missing. "No, not about that." The first man lowered his voice, glancing around before leaning closer. "It's about those mercenaries, the Black Hounds. They say some of them didn't come back." The other man's grin faded. "What do you mean, didn't come back? Those bastards don't die easily. Were the bandits really that strong? That's the strange part. Rumor has it they were working together the whole time." As soon as he said that, the man with the eye patch glanced around nervously and hushed him. "Quiet. Are you trying to get us killed?" "Ah, you're right." The two leaned closer and started whispering. "Some say there's a new force moving in, going after nobles and merchants alike. If you ask me, it serves those bastards right. Could it be the Thieves' Guild? Are they finally making a move? Perhaps. If they are, things might start to change around here." They nodded to each other, then leaned back and returned to their drinks. Unbeknownst to the two drunks, a third person was listening to their conversation. The newcomer had just arrived and was looking for news. The person wore a dark robe, and even their mouth was hidden by something that resembled a mask. Thieves' Guild? Now that's an interesting bit of information. I wonder who is spreading that rumor. The stranger seemed intrigued by what the two men were saying and stayed longer to listen. However, everyone was mistaken about what was truly happening. The being responsible for all this chaos was somewhere else, preparing to take the next step on his journey. There it is, Gleam, level 25. Several days had passed since the attack on the bandit camp. Rusty and Gleam had returned to their lair and spent more time leveling in the dungeon to get Rusty to level 25. For F-rank monsters, he only needed to reach level 10, for E rank, it was 15, and now, at D rank, it was 25. Each time a rank was broken, the level limit expanded, and it would do so again once he reached C rank. Name: Rusty. Classification: Enchanted Twilight Steel Armor D, L25. Type: Magical/Inorganic. Hit points HP: 732/732. Magic points MP: 562/562. Special points SP: 90/90ths. Strength: 107D plus 55. Agility: 69D plus 12. Dexterity: 74D plus 5. Constitution: 115D plus 67. Intelligence: 86D plus 20. Wisdom: 91D plus 21. Willpower: 85D plus 19. Durability: D plus. Everything is coming together nicely. I'll be going ahead, Gleam. Once I'm back, let's go to that crystal tunnel. I'm not sure how long this will take, so protect everyone while I'm gone. Omega. Gleam nodded in a very human-like way and prepared to close the latch over the compartment where Rusty would store his main body. As before, he would bury his frame underground to ensure that no one could find him, even if they managed to break in. Normally, this would be the time for Rusty to test the last skill he had received upon reaching this level, but it was only a passive ability that made certain things more convenient. Lesser Twilight Mastery. Passive skills. This skill balances the twilight energies within the user's body. It reduces mana consumption for skills that use twilight energy and makes them easier to control. The same benefit applies to light and dark elemental energies. It does make my Twilight Embrace easier to activate, along with all my other elemental skills. This skill gave him a major boost in combat stamina because it reduced the amount of mana he used for his skills and spells. It also allowed him to merge the two more effectively. He had been waiting for the Soul Forge to remain open longer so he could test it, as perhaps with this skill, he could finally include a twilight-based enchantment in his body without causing an explosion. Well then, Gleam, I'll see you later. Take care. With Gleam now being a D-rank monster, he no longer had to worry as much. She could fly, so escaping from the city would be easy for her if anything went wrong. He could safely leave everything in her care while he grew stronger. Soon, he reached his hidden spot where a coffin-like box waited. He placed himself inside, closed the latch, and concealed it just as he had before, then entered the evolutionary space. I'm back, but it sure takes more time to get back here. Rusty walked along the bridge while staring at the large castle ahead. His thoughts drifted to his progress, which had begun to slow. Reaching E rank and even D rank had not taken long, but now his advancement had stalled. The monsters in the dungeon were not strong enough, and hunting humans was too dangerous for him at the moment. Well, I'll take everything at my own pace. He said this as he moved toward the next challenge. Although he wanted to grow stronger and uncover more of what this world held, he was not in a rush. Even so, he understood the dangers before him. One mistake could cost him his life, so the less attention he drew to himself, the better. The sooner he reached a higher rank, the safer he would be. I wonder how I would fare against those guys. Aberdeen's and Alexander's memories surfaced in his mind, becoming clearer as his strength increased. Within those memories were many powerful beings. Demonic generals and heroes who had both aided and opposed them. From what he knew, all of them were at least A rank or higher. They were not his direct enemies, but they had once betrayed his guides. He was unsure how he would handle the situation, but if they stood in his way, he would show them no mercy. Now then, will there be more than just one frame here this time? With a quicker stride, he finally reached the Soul Forge and pushed the door open. Inside, he found not one but 3 well-crafted bodies waiting for him to choose from. So, it's that kind of choice again. Although 3 bodies were available, there was only one real option. The one in the middle resembled his current form the most, and he already knew it would be the one he would choose. I'm sure you'll pick this one, right, my dear Rusty? You should know by now that's not going to happen, a burden. Can't blame a Demon King for trying. A burden cackled as his light drifted around a suit of pitch-black armor, similar to the one that had stood here before. It stood on the left side of what appeared to be a slightly upgraded version of his current frame. To the right of the central armor stood another suit, forged from bright white metal that gave it the appearance of a holy paladin's armor. Classification: Enchanted High Steel Darkness Armor D. Type: Magical/Inorganic/Darkness. Description: An empty vessel waiting to be filled by a demonic soul. This armor enhances dark magic and destructive abilities. It focuses on mastering the art of destruction and values power above all else. Classification: Enchanted High Steel Light Armor D. Type: Magical/Inorganic/Light. Description: An empty vessel waiting to be filled by an angelic soul. This armor enhances light magic and protective abilities. It focuses on mastering defense and support magic while emphasizing endurance and protection. Classification: Enchanted Twilight High Steel Armor D. Type: Magical/Inorganic. Description: An empty vessel waiting to be filled by a soul that carries both light and darkness. It has been imbued with arcane enchantments that grant spell-casting capabilities to whoever inhabits it. The high steel metal is far more durable than regular enchanted steel, allowing the enchantments to last longer and hold greater power. Those two look almost exactly like the lesser darkness armor and lesser light armor I could choose in the past, but I wonder, can I make those too? The previous armor frames had been different, made of an entirely different metal, but these were crafted from enchanted high steel, the same material his new body would be made from. He could sense that the dark armor was saturated with dark energy while the light one was filled with light energy. With his current knowledge, he could probably infuse his mana during the smelting process to create the base materials for these armors, then use them as his own body or as vessels for his guides, which a burden had already noticed. That's a fine idea, Rusty. While this form looks beneath a demon lord, it's better than nothing. A burden had been itching to move freely in the real world. By using the puppet armor skill and his guides, Rusty could create 2 powerful allies. These 2 had once been veteran warriors, among the strongest beings alive. The bodies he could forge for them would not come close to their original power, but their experience alone would make them formidable opponents who would not easily fall to adventurers or ordinary monsters. I won't decline if you decide to make them, but perhaps create the first one for me to test the limits. You can't trust a burden not to run away if there aren't any safeguards applied," said Alexander as he circled the armor of light. "What do you mean, you lying hero? I would never betray my dear Rusty. Don't trust him, you have my word. Once I inhabit that armor, I'll be nothing more than an ally, together we will conquer the world." Rusty did not respond, but he silently agreed and knew the Demon Lord couldn't be fully trusted. A burden had already tried to escape several times. The only thing keeping him bound was a link to Rusty's very being, which prevented him from leaving a certain area. If that restriction were removed by giving him a body, the only way to stop him would be through combat. Alexander, on the other hand, showed no signs of deceit, so it seemed wiser to create the light armor first. "Well, we'll think about that later. Now did something change around here?" While his guides argued over who should receive a body first, Rusty took a moment to look around. The main chamber did not seem much different at first glance, but he knew that after certain upgrades, parts of the forge often changed or gained new functions. He decided to take a quick tour to see what had improved, and there were indeed some changes. As before, more books on smithing and enchanting had appeared for him to study. The library had expanded slightly, though not by much. In the smithing area, the tools looked more refined, and a new smelter had been built from different materials, equipped with instruments designed specifically for working with high steel. Some small changes, but not much. Next up is... The only 2 places left were the training chamber and the summoning chamber. Rusty knew that once he entered the latter, he would probably be there for a long time, so he decided to visit the training chamber first. It didn't look like much had changed since the last time he was there. This area was probably the least used part of the Soul Forge, since it only allowed him to fight enemies he had already defeated, a feature that was not very useful. However, This time something was different. As he went through the panel, a new option appeared. Is that Varkas? He was genuinely surprised. He could now fight many people from the recent incident. The bandit leader was there, along with several of the bandits they had killed, and even the mercenaries and their leader. Varkas was not someone Rusty had truly fought before, as he had only been in his presence. Could it be that arrow? Was that enough? While Rusty was hiding, Varkas had fired an arrow at his puppet armor's helmet. Perhaps all that was needed for the training chamber to register someone as an enemy was to begin a fight, and finishing it was not necessary. Maybe it only required him to stay close to them for a certain time. If that was true, then this place had just become far more useful than before. After experimenting with the Soul Forge's options, Rusty summoned Varkas, or rather, a simulation of him. The interface warned that some data was missing. The system could replicate his skills, but not his full equipment set. His weapon data, in particular, seemed to be missing. Still, Rusty could assign him armaments from other foes or from weapons he had forged himself. I think he used a lighter blade, right? A saber. Moments later, Varkas appeared clad in simple leather armor, an enchanted saber in hand. The weapon glimmered faintly with a basic sharpening enchantment. It was not his normal weapon, but enough for a test. Please select the field for combat practice. With the current version of the training chamber, he could also change the scenery. For now, he chose the first option available, an open field. The surroundings shimmered as if the world were made of rippling glass, and in the blink of an eye, Rusty stood in a vast, sunlit plain. The air felt warmer now, and the illusion seemed just as real as the Soul Forge itself. Varkas appeared a few meters away, sword drawn, his amber eyes as sharp as ever. Above his head floated a countdown timer, and once it reached 0, the battle would begin. Rusty pulled out his halberd, its blade glowing faintly with a lightning enchantment, and braced himself. When the timer hit 0, the fight started. The simulated Varkas charged forward, blade sweeping to the side. His speed was astonishing for a human opponent. Their weapons clashed, and Rusty found himself overwhelmed by the flurry of rapid strikes that crashed against his defenses. He responded by activating his own skills, channeling every boost he could to narrow the gap. Once his strength caught up, the fight became more balanced, though he was still forced to retreat several times. Then, during one exchange, Varkas's blade suddenly shattered. Ah! The simulation froze. The broken weapon dissolved into light, and Rusty's damage started to vanish as the system reset. He looked down at the traces where his armor had been cut and thought that if the real Varkas had been using his true weapon, he would not have survived. It was clear he still had a long way to go, but with this upgraded training ground, he finally had the means to push himself against stronger foes. With this in mind, he restarted the simulation. He would not stop until he won at least one bout. I'm getting used to this. Once I have my new form, defeating this guy might actually be possible. Rusty stood bruised and battered, facing the illusion of Varkas, the mercenary leader. A deep gash across his opponent's body marked Rusty's first real success after a string of crushing defeats. Despite using a bladed weapon that was weak against Rusty's steel frame, the illusionary fighter had managed to land several clean hits, leaving Rusty's metallic body in pieces. Only the Soul Forge, which provided him with limitless materials for repair, allowed him to continue the fight. You've learned his attack pattern, Alexander said, floating closer. But don't think you'll perform this well in a real fight. The world around them shifted, the grassy field fading away and reforming into the familiar training chamber. Rusty absorbed his guide's words. He knew Varkas was rarely alone, and even one ally at his side would make the real battle far more dangerous. If only I could check back once I get my new body. Rusty regretted that he would lose access to the training facility after his transformation. Once he evolved, his visits to the Soul Forge would be limited to crafting. For now, he had learned nearly everything this opponent could teach him. If a real battle occurred, he might at least be able to escape. I might be able to handle him with Gleam's help, but it would still be risky. For the time being, he decided to leave the training room. There was little left to gain here, and time was slipping away. This time, he did not need to learn new enchanting skills, only to refine what he already knew. He had two choices: build up his arsenal or visit his old friend Gwen at Mistwood Academy. There were several experiments he wanted to try in crafting. His new skill allowed him to handle twilight energies more effectively, but he had not tested it in the forge yet. His understanding of enchantments involving twilight energy, a fusion of light and dark, was still shallow. He would need to do some research in the library before moving forward. The last time he had spent months tinkering in the forge, and this time would likely be no different. I think I'll visit her now. It's not like I can use the better weapons and armor parts in the summoning chamber anyway. Rusty made his decision. For some reason, he was unable to use newly forged equipment outside the main forge, not even in the testing chamber. The last time he had been offered an item box, he could not use it to store weapons made of the new enchanted steel, so he doubted it would work now. With that in mind, he walked toward the summoning chamber to review the available missions. This place hasn't changed at all. Let's see. He approached the console, examined the icons, and quickly schemed through the mission list. As expected, the world where Gwendolyn lived appeared at the top, though other options were available as well. Quest: Mistwood Academy B Class. Difficulty: Medium. Description: Help your summoner strengthen her position in the Mistwood Academy. Due to recent events, she has advanced in rank and joined a new class. Her achievements have been called into question by peers who refuse to accept her. That sounds kind of vague. Rusty wasn't sure what to make of this description. The first time, the mission had been a simple duel he needed to win. The next involved a forest filled with summoned beasts, another simple to understand task. This one, however, gave no clear direction. Would he need to face her peers in a series of duels, or was something else going on? The next one is another minion of a necromancer. Quest: Necromancer's Sword. Difficulty: Hard. Description: A necromancer summons you for protection from certain doom. Fight through swarms of soldiers and escort them to safety. This mission seemed more straightforward and suited to his abilities. It focused on combat, although it did not specify where the necromancer was located. The enemy might be trapped in a dungeon or imprisoned somewhere. The higher difficulty made it more appealing, but he knew missions could change unexpectedly, so he could not base his decision on that. Quest: Tea time. Difficulty: Very easy. Description: A young genius summoner has summoned you by mistake. Take part in the tea party and make sure not to upset your summoner. What is this one? The third quest was unusual. It appeared he would be summoned accidentally by a child and forced to play along, this time by joining a tea party. The very easy rating suggested that the rewards would not be impressive. With that, his list of options came to an end. If I wasn't limited to one option, those necromancer missions would be interesting. Although Rusty had already decided to go with Gwendolyn, he found it frustrating that he could not access the other missions afterward. The rewards from these missions were quite good but also limited. His helmet still carried the lightning talisman he had received from the last mission, and he continued to use it to this day. Before I go, let me check one more thing. He was disappointed that he could not take on multiple missions, but he decided not to dwell on it. Instead, he selected the summoner icon and brought up Gwen's status screen to see if she had improved since their last meeting. To him, she had always seemed weak, and the main challenge in most missions was keeping her from getting injured. Name: Gwendolyn Rainstar. Classification: Summoner L11. Type: Human. Strength: F+. Agility: F+. Dexterity: E. Constitution: F+. Intelligence: E+. Wisdom: E++. Willpower: E. Durability: E. Oh, her stats have gotten better. She has been leveling up. To his surprise, Gwen had started improving. He had used the system to give her the ability to summon a few lesser living armors, and she had advanced from an F rank being to an E rank. Her wisdom stat was also quite high, and she might already have a few overpoints in it. Not bad. He nodded, satisfied that he had given his summoner the tools needed to become stronger. Her class had changed, and all of her stats had improved. Once everyone was checked, he selected the mission and received a message similar to the one from before. Mistwood Academy B class quest has been picked. Please stand in the summoning circle to continue. The user's status will be concealed during the summoning. Some of the user's abilities will be locked. Raise the synergy with the summoner to remove these restrictions. After stepping onto the summoning platform, he was given the option to place items into his inventory box. It had grown larger since the last time, allowing him to store more than just a mace. Although it was still far smaller than his regular stash tab, he now had a few more choices, as a bow and a quiver full of arrows could fit inside as well. With everything prepared, the summoning circle glowed brightly, and he was transported toward a new adventure. Hey, wake up! What are you doing in there? We will be late. Several knocks landed against a wooden bathroom door. Gee, give me a minute, I'm almost ready. The voice belonged to the girl who had locked herself inside. Her name was Gwendolyn Rainstar, a teenage girl from a noble family that had nearly collapsed. She looked into the mirror and studied her reflection. Her face was still a little pale, but the dark circles under her eyes had faded. She looked healthier than she had a few months ago, yet her confidence was slipping. I made it this far. I can do it. I just need to keep going. My family is depending on me. She tried to encourage herself to push forward and prove that she truly belonged at the academy. Her luck had changed after one fateful duel, but she no longer felt sure it would be enough. Since placing first in the exam, people had begun to take her seriously, but her recent performance had not lived up to their expectations. She struggled to keep up with the image others had of her, and it was becoming clear that the cracks in her confidence were starting to show. What are you doing in there, Gwen? That's it, I'm coming in. And no, wait, Astrella. Suddenly, a wisp of light slipped through the keyhole and formed into a small fairy. Airy, open the door. The fairy nodded, grasped the key still in the lock, and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a green-haired girl standing on the other side. There you are. I just need to prepare a little more. You look fine. Now come on, we are going to be late. Astrella grabbed Gwen's wrist and half-pulled her out of the bathroom before she could protest further. The other girl's energy was overwhelming, though Gwen wasn't really resisting. Airy landed on Astrella's shoulder as she looked her friend over. There is no time to prepare. You look fine. Just carry your badge with pride. We both deserve this. Now come. Gwen tried to protest, but her friend held her wrist tightly and pulled her out of their dorm room. I still can't believe we both made it into B class at the same time, said Astrella, her voice full of excitement. Gwen knew how hard her friend had worked to earn her promotion from C class to B, and now the moment had arrived. The new semester had begun, and both of them had been granted access to the second most prestigious class, with only the A class ranked higher. Yet, Gwen said in a quiet tone. She was nowhere near as happy as her friend. Everything was moving too fast. Just a few months earlier, she had been in D class and had expected to move up to C at best after her last exam. The teachers, however, seemed to have other plans for her. When she was still in her old class and nearly expelled, she had to share a cramped room with 4 other students. The dorm floor had only one small bathroom for everyone. Things had changed since her promotion. Now that she was in B class, she had a large, comfortable space shared with just one roommate, her new friend Astrella Fjord. Each of them had a private room with a shared bathroom and a common area where they could talk or train. The dorm was equipped with channeling mets to help students improve their summoning skills and strengthen their mana control, something the lower class dorms did not offer. Now come, time to meet our new classmates. Gwen barely had time to catch her breath as Astrella pulled her down the wide marble hallways of Mistwood Academy. The air shimmered faintly with magic, and thin trails of mana drifted like silver threads. Every light and device was powered by enchantments. Banners lined the walls, each bearing the Academy's crest, a silver tree with roots and branches intertwined to symbolize the unity between the mortal and spirit realms where the summoned creatures resided. They passed beneath a glass archway that connected the dormitories to a courtyard. Gwen's pace slowed despite Astrella's insistent tug. Even after months of attending the academy, this view still left her breathless. The courtyard was a vast circular plaza paved with white stone, filled with both students and summoned creatures. Dozens of familiars wandered among the crowd, so commonplace that few people paid them any attention. A wolf with reddish fur padded beside a student reading from a stack of notes. Nearby, a small serpent with delicate wings glided past, carrying a letter in its mouth. Come on. You're staring again. Astrella laughed, though she too smiled as a group of upperclassmen walked by, accompanied by a towering golem made of crystal and stone. One day, we'll be the ones everyone looks at like that. I guess. Gwen murmured, though her gaze lingered on the golem a little longer. Mistwood Academy was immense, and this section was off limits to most students. Only those in Class B were allowed here. The A class had its own courtyard entirely separate from the rest, while classes C and D shared a different area, which she had previously gone to. The two girls reached the Summoner's Pavilion, a long, cathedral-like building that served as both classroom and testing ground for practical lessons. The entrance doors, made of polished black wood and silver inlays, opened automatically at their approach. Inside, the air was cool and perfect for studying. Once they were inside, the summoned creatures had seemingly vanished. Only the ones small enough to fit through the halls were accepted, and some teachers were scolding students who had tried to sneak in something too large. Haha, that would never happen to me and Eri. Astrella giggled at the sight of a boy being reprimanded for bringing in a large toad-like monster with a single horn. Gwendolen moved to the other side of the corridor at the sight of the creature and sighed in relief as they passed it. Gwen, you can't get startled by those things. We are both third years now, and we need to act like upperclassmen. We need to be ready to offer advice to the young ones. I'm not sure anyone should be looking for advice from someone like M. Before Gwen could finish, her friend gave her a light jab in the side with her finger. You need to stop talking like that. Show some pride in your skills, you've made it this far, you deserve it. Gwen nodded, her courage wavering, but she had to admit that Astrella was right. The last few months had been nothing but torture. Ever since the exam where she placed first, she had devoted herself entirely to studying and strengthening her summoning power. Sleep had become optional as she pushed herself to expand her mana capacity and deepen her knowledge. She was not the same girl she had once been, and she knew it, yet she still doubted whether she measured up to the rest of Class B. Without her most powerful summon, who had not appeared for quite some time, she felt incomplete. Rusty, where are you? She thought to herself as she climbed the stairs to the third floor, where her class was located. The higher they went, the more her nerves tightened. The image of Catherine still haunted her dreams. Many students at the academy were eager to display their loyalty to the Grandwell house, and she knew that once classes began, something was certain to happen. When Gwen and Astrella entered the classroom, they were greeted by the chatter of conversations among their classmates. The room was bright and spacious, layered with faint mana fields woven into the walls. It was one of Mistwood's special features, created to prevent summoned creatures from going berserk. The desks curved in a semicircle around the teacher's desk and the massive blackboard behind it. The students' seats rose gradually toward the back to improve visibility. A handful of students looked their way, and Gwen immediately felt a dozen eyes on her. She had expected this, and it was one of the reasons she had struggled to come here in the first place. Whispers began as soon as she took a step forward. That's her. The girl from D class. Rainstar, right? The one who jumped 2 ranks in one term. Yeah, I heard her familiar with some kind of living armor. Probably a fluke summon. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her satchel. Keep walking. Just ignore them. She thought to herself, but Astrella, however, turned on her heel and flashed a radiant smile at the gossiping students. Yes, she's the one who placed first in the main exam, in case anyone forgot. Maybe the rest of you could learn something from her. The room fell silent again, and Gwen wished she could melt into the floor. She knew her friend meant well, but Astrella was unaware of the truth. Gwen's best summon was unpredictable and difficult to summon. She had tried to resummon Rusty several times after the exam but had been unable to. Even now, he would not answer her call, and she knew Astrella was overestimating her abilities. I need to tell her, or she will get me in trouble again. For some reason, Astrella liked to boast about Gwen's strength and wanted her to display it more often. Even when Gwen's recent tests had gone poorly, Astrella insisted she was just holding back and would summon Rusty again when things got serious. It almost seemed as if she wanted Gwen to make a fool of herself. Come on, we should sit, how about right there? Gwen pointed toward the topmost seat by the window, far from everyone else's eyes. It was one of the least desirable spots in the room since the view of the blackboard was poor and it would make hearing the lecture harder. Wouldn't it be better to sit somewhere in the front instead? Or maybe in the middle? Astrella scanned the rows of seats with a grin that was far too confident for the situation. Front row, of course. The best students always sit in front. Before Gwen could protest, her friend grabbed her wrist again and marched toward the 2 desks at the front center of the room. They were positioned directly beneath the teacher's lectern. Several students turned toward them, their voices rising. Some sounded surprised, others openly hostile. Front row. Do they even know who sits there? They are bold. She really thinks she belongs there just because of that exam. Gwen's stomach tightened. She could feel the resentment radiating from the other students. Sitting in the front row was more than a matter of pride, it was a declaration of status. At Mistwood Academy, even where one sat reflected rank, power, and lineage. Estrella either failed to notice or simply did not care. She placed her hand confidently on one of the desks. Here. Perfect. We'll see everything clearly from here. Estrella, maybe we should. Before Gwen could finish, 3 new students entered the classroom. 2 were young men, and the third was a pale-faced girl whose complexion made her look almost ghostly. She moved slowly, and as soon as she stepped inside, the room filled with whispers. There she is. This is going to be good. Now they're in for it. The pale girl's footsteps echoed through the room, and the chatter died instantly. Though she was of average height, her presence carried an unmistakable weight. Her long hair, black as obsidian, was tied neatly with a thin white ribbon. On her left cheek rested a faint spider tattoo, the ink glimmering faintly as if it were alive. The 2 students walking beside her were tall, clean-cut boys who carried themselves like knightly escorts. They moved half a step behind her, their posture rigid and respectful, making it clear she was the one in command. Gwen's heart sank the moment she recognized one of them. Oh no, that person was there during the exam with Catherine. She didn't recognize the pale girl, but one of the boys was familiar. He was the snake user who had been defeated by the lightning tiger during the exam. If he served under Catherine and now followed someone in B class, then the girl leading him had to be exceptional. Gwen's knowledge of academy rankings was limited. She had never paid much attention to the lists, assuming she would never reach a ranked position herself. Yet the presence before her radiated power and danger. The girl's eyes were a strange, glowing shade of violet, and they narrowed the moment she noticed the intrusion at the front of the class. And who might thou be? Remove thyself, that desk does not belong to thou. The pale girl spoke, her voice calm yet commanding, quiet but impossible to ignore. There was something unusual about the way she talked, but that was not what unsettled Gwen. What struck her more was how the rest of the class reacted. It made it clear why the entire front row had been empty. Even though 3 desks could easily seat 6 people, no one had dared to occupy them. This girl and her followers were clearly the reason. Sure, I'll just... Gwen began to lower her head, ready to step aside. She had no desire to draw attention on her first day. Although she had gained some courage in recent weeks, her first instinct was still to yield. Without her main summon present, she did not feel capable of standing up to these B-class members, especially the ones at the top. But her friend Estrella had other plans. Hold on there. Why don't you remove thyself instead? For reasons Gwen could not understand, her new friend seemed determined to get her into trouble. Estrella even spoke in a mocking tone, imitating the way the pale girl had addressed them. Every student turned their attention toward the 2 girls at the front. Gwen's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Estrella stood firm with one hand on her hip, and her fairy mirrored her perfectly. The pale girl tilted her head slightly, studying Estrella as if she were an insect that had dared to challenge her. Repeat that. The girl's tone didn't rise. If anything, it grew quieter. You wish I to move? Estrella folded her arms. You heard me. There are plenty of seats. We got here first. The pale girl blinked slowly as though weighing Estrella's words with clinical precision. The faint shimmer in her spider tattoo pulsed once. The 2 boys behind her exchanged uneasy glances, clearly aware of what might follow. A murmur spread through the class since everyone already knew what was about to happen. It seems thou art unaware of tradition. When a claim is made over a seat, it is not words that decide, but strength. Are thou prepared to stand by thine insolence? Estrella's expression did not change. It almost seemed as if she had been waiting for this. Unaware? I think not. I simply believe the true number 1 of B class should be seated in the front. She shifted her head to the side so Gwen could see her wink. It was clear that Estrella had no idea how much stress she was causing her new friend, who could not find the words to save the situation. Then thou hast invoked the right of challenge. The pale girl responded in a monotone, calm fashion. Before she could finish, one of the young men behind her stepped forward. He was the same one Gwen had interacted with before, and his brows were furrowed. Lady Urania, please allow me. You should not have to face this pretender. Let me handle it instead. The pale girl did not respond immediately. She slowly raised one hand and rubbed her cheek, her long nails darker than her hair. Very well. If thou insist. The classroom erupted with whispers. Gwen's stomach sank as one of the young men called her out directly. A duel on the first day of the new term sounded like a disaster waiting to happen. She only wanted to spend her days in peace and hopefully graduate while staying in B class, but it seemed that was not going to happen. Now then, Gwendolyn Rainstar, if you wish to sit here, you will have to go through me first. Estrella turned to Gwen, looking disappointed, though for a different reason. Darn it, I wanted to get their leader. You might not get to show your true abilities against just an underling, but it should still be good enough to earn the front seat. Haha, yeah, sure. Gwendolyn looked at the young man standing before her. He was ready for a duel, and refusing would be worse than losing. She was unsure of her chances, but she was also curious to see how she ranked in this class now that she could use living armor summons. Before she could respond, and just as the whispers grew louder, the teacher entered the room. What is this? Why aren't you all seated? The teacher was tall and thin, dressed in something that resembled a tailored suit. His head was completely bald, but his full beard made up for it, and a monocle rested on his left eye. Teacher, we have a seating dispute. One of the students seated in the second row called out and pointed to the perpetrators. The teacher's sharp gaze swept across the room like a blade. His eyes lingered on Gwen, then Estrella, and finally on Arania and her two followers. A seating dispute. He repeated slowly, adjusting his monocle. It is a new term, perhaps we should handle this now. The man nodded, implying that it was something he was already accustomed to. The teacher tapped the side of his monocle with one gloved finger as he thought. Well then, are there any other seating disputes I should be aware of? A murmur spread through the class. To Gwen's dismay, several hands went up. At first, some were hesitant, but once they realized it was acceptable and that no punishment would follow, more hands rose confidently. The man sighed as he set down a large book on his lectern. As expected. A new term brings new ambitions. It is the same every year. He turned toward the board, and with a motion of his hand, a piece of chalk floated into the air and began to write. Very well. Since you are all so eager to test one another, we shall make productive use of this chaos. Our first lesson will be practical. You will resolve your seating disputes through sanctioned duels. Win, and you claim the seat. Lose, and you move to the back. Once the teacher finished, the words new seating arrangement took shape on the blackboard along with a drawing of the whole lecture hall. Isn't this great, Gwen? Show them what you can do. I'll be cheering for you. Estrella said this with a thumbs up and a cheerful smile. Gwen could only nod sheepishly, as it was already too late and the teacher had gotten involved. From what she knew, a duel was held for each desk, and once someone won, that desk could be used by up to 2 people. If the winner allowed it, another person could sit there, which meant that for Estrella, who preferred to take on a supportive role, Gwen's victory would benefit her as well. Aha, sure. Gwen replied, and soon they started walking. Once everyone who wanted to change seats had stepped forward, they moved to one of the training chambers. Since magic protection was embedded in most areas, summoned creatures could only fight in designated spaces. As expected, no one dared to challenge the first-seated Arania Venomridge, and Gwen was set to face one of her followers in order to win the first desk by the window. The dueling chamber was large, though not as vast as the arena where Gwen had defeated Catherine. The main platform was shaped like a hexagon and paved with stone blocks. Around it, a faintly shimmering barrier marked the boundary of the battlefield. Beyond that, a ring of observation decks encircled the chamber, each separated by thick panels of reinforced glass. The spectators' seats were elevated and distant, ensuring that even the strongest shockwaves would never reach them. Gwen followed the others toward the observation area, and once everyone had gathered, the teacher began to speak. First duel. The teacher announced while looking over a stack of parchment he had brought. Gwendolyn Rainstar vs Eldrick Greystone. The match will continue until surrender, incapacitation, or mana depletion. You may use as many summons and any support items you have on hand. Why do I always have this kind of luck? Gwen felt a wave of dread and wondered if she should call it off. Yet before she could decide, her thoughts drifted to the past few weeks and that fateful day she met the strange summon called Rusty. Since then, she had trained hard and grown stronger. She now believed she could stand among the C-class students, not the strongest but no longer weak either. I just have to try. I promised myself I wouldn't run anymore. She clenched her small fist and stepped forward toward the dueling arena. As expected, more students began to gather in the observation decks. Not everyone had classes at this hour, and the prospect of a duel always drew a crowd. Some lower-classmen whispered among themselves, joined by curious upperclassmen. The third years are having a duel for seating. Rain stars that girl from D class. She's going to get crushed. Eldrick's been in B class for 3 years. He'll never lose to someone like her. Are you sure? I heard she beat someone from A class before. This could be interesting. The murmurs grew louder as Gwen and Eldrick took their positions. The barrier shimmered again, sealing them inside. Just as before, Gwen found herself underestimated. Her opponent had been in B class from the start, with access to better training facilities and superior support items that strengthened his summons. You were lucky last time, but your luck ends now. Eldrick shouted and raised his hand, summoning a massive serpent that coiled beside him. Its scales gleamed with a green sheen, and its twin fangs dripped venom. Behold, my twin-fanged green viper. It will make short work of your creatures. The time for battle now came, and Gwen started by summoning her defenders, multiple living armors. 2 bronze figures rose from glowing circles at Gwen's feet, their forms clanking to life as mana sizzled around them. Each stood a head taller than her, and thick plates gleamed faintly under the arena lights. A third circle appeared behind them, and an armor made of iron with a similar build emerged. It held a large shield and a pike, while the other 2 carried bows. Instantly, the audience reacted. 2 bronze types and 1 iron? She's using low-rank constructs. No way those can handle an E+ summon. Gwen ignored the comments and steadied her breathing. The bronze armors raised their bows while the iron one moved forward to confront the large serpent. It was a simple tactic, using the 2 weaker armors as distractions and ranged support for the iron construct. The viper hissed, its eyes narrowing before it lunged at the iron armor. The serpent's body slammed against the construct, and the impact echoed through the arena like a thunderclap. The iron armor braced with its shield, skidding back several steps while digging its heels into the stone floor. Sparks flew as the serpent's fangs scraped against the metal plates, and cracks appeared in the shield almost immediately. The bronze archers fired, twin volleys of glowing arrows striking the serpent's scales. They hit their target but barely left a mark. The projectiles clattered off harmlessly, turning into mana particles once they hit the ground. Pathetic! Eldrick shouted from across the arena. Your toys won't even scratch it. Gwen stayed silent, focusing on her constructs. They were not the strongest, but they required little mana to maintain. Even when the snake punctured the shield, she could restore it with a small infusion of energy. The real challenge was dealing damage to the serpent, whose scales seemed impervious to the bronze arrows. Maybe if I hit the eye, but it's moving too fast. The iron armor lunged again, thrusting its pike toward the viper's side. The serpent twisted mid-motion, wrapping its massive body not around the weapon but around the entire construct instead. Its coils tightened, bending the metal frame until it began to collapse. A chance! Gwen seized the moment. With the serpent now stationary, she commanded the 2 bronze archers to target its eyes. 1 arrow missed and bounced harmlessly off the scales, but the other struck true, piercing the serpent's eye. The audience gasped as the viper let out a violent hiss. Its tail whipped around wildly, and it released the iron armor, which now hung in pieces, its frame bent and mangled. Even though summoned creatures were made of mana, they still behaved like living monsters. Animal types such as this serpent could still feel pain, while Gwen's armored summons could not. When the opportunity came, she poured her mana into the iron armor, restoring its form. The metal plates began to shift and bend back into place. The audience gasped as the viper opened its mouth and released a spray that looked like venom. The substance struck one of the bronze archers, and the construct began to melt. When the liquid dripped down to its knee, the archer lost balance and collapsed to the ground. Gwen gritted her teeth, but everything was unfolding as planned. Eldrick was focused on destroying her ranged fighter, leaving her iron soldier free to act. Fully restored, it gripped its spear with both hands. The weapon glowed red as it unleashed a powerful thrust that drove straight into the serpent's remaining eye. A piercing hiss filled the chamber. The serpent's body convulsed and slammed against the floor and the barrier walls as it writhed in agony. It was truly suffering, and the iron armor pressed its attack. For a brief moment, victory seemed certain. The spear was pulled out and driven in again, as if to finish the creature. It twitched once more and then went completely still. It's over. Gwen whispered to herself. Not quite. Eldric's voice cut through the silence. His expression was calm and confident, and his eyes glowed faintly. With a single motion, the massive serpent dissolved into drifting particles of mana. You thought I only had one serpent? Eldric raised his hand again, his voice echoing through the chamber. Serpent, return, and rise anew. The air around him rippled as a pulse of mana surged from his core. A summoning circle flashed at his feet, larger than before, and the remnants of the first snake's mana flowed back into it. From that circle emerged not one but two identical vipers, exact copies of the first. Not bad, he can summon two of those at once. Smart, he managed to take back some of his mana from the defeated creature. Wait, I don't think he's done yet. To everyone's surprise, the 2E+ monsters were not the young man's limit. He summoned several smaller ones, 6 additional ones. Those look like horned copperheads, the same rank as those bronze armors. But wait, some of them have 2 horns. That means they're regular E ranks. Many of the students were astonished by the number of snake monsters Eldric could summon. The fight that had begun with 3 against 1 was starting to turn. Gwen reacted quickly, summoning more of her own creatures, but her limit was only 2 iron armors and 3 bronze at once. She was already struggling against one of the larger vipers, and with her mana nearly drained, she knew she would not be able to restore any of her summons once they fell. Gwen's stomach tightened as she realized she was at a disadvantage. She had made progress in her training, but this young man was still far stronger. Her most powerful summon was only an E-rank iron living armor, and her earlier strategy of striking at weak points would no longer work. She soon found herself cornered at the edge of the arena, her armors barely holding off the relentless assault. Let's see how long you can keep those puppets standing. Eldric's hands moved as he poured mana into his serpents. They struck the armors, coiling tightly and sinking their fangs into the metal. Even the magical suits began to buckle under the pressure, their surfaces corroding from the acid-laced venom. Was she really first in that exam? It must have been a fluke, right? This is boring. Just finish it already. The people watching from afar had already made up their minds. To them, Gwen had lost, and continuing to watch was a waste of time. Their teacher studied the battle and wondered if he should declare the victor already. Only one person still had a grin on her face, Astrella Fjord. Why are thou smiling? Thy friend is going to lose. Haha, you'll see, she isn't done yet. Astrella replied with a smug look, and her fairy mimicked her mannerisms once again. At this point, everyone in B class was convinced that the two of them were fools who did not know their place. Gwendolyn had no summons left, and her opponent was merely toying with her. There seemed to be no chance of victory, or so they thought. Should I just give up? Gwen thought as she looked at the slithering snakes on the ground. Mana particles drifted through the air as her last armor crumbled. She managed to recover a bit of energy, enough to summon one final armor for defense, but she no longer saw the point. I should just... Then something flashed before her eyes, the image of the summon that had made all of this possible. She could feel it again, the same sensation she had experienced twice before. Without thinking, she reached out to summon once more, and something began to appear. She's so stubborn. Just give up already. Ha, what is that thing even going to do against all those serpents? Wait, something's off about that armor. It looks different. Now that you mention it. From within the new magic circle, another metal frame rose. At first, people thought it was just another suit of iron armor, but the shape was not quite the same. This armor stood half a head taller, its metal imbued with enchantments, and its helmet shaped differently. In its right hand, it held a large halberd, also enchanted and sparkling with thunder magic, something the students immediately found strange. Why would a living armor use lightning magic? Isn't that its weakness? Don't ask me, but the enchantment on the helmet looks like it protects it from lightning. That's interesting. 2 upperclassmen chatted as the newly summoned armor took shape, making the battle look far more exciting. 4 of the smaller copperhead serpents lunged at the construct, but before they could sink their fangs in, the armored figure swung its halberd. With a single strike, a burst of lightning erupted, charring the serpents and cutting through them in the process. Whoa, it took them all out with one swing. What kind of living armor is that? The crowd came alive once more. Even those who had been ready to leave turned their attention back to the dueling platform. The echo of the thunderclap still rolled across the reinforced glass, fading only after several seconds. That's... Eldric's grin faltered as he saw the new summon appear. His serpents froze, and he ordered them to retreat for now. Astrella began to cheer as if she had been waiting for this creature to arrive. Arania, standing beside her, widened her eyes, seemingly in shock at the monster's appearance. Haha, now the real duel has begun. Astrella shouted at the B-class students who had doubted her friend's strength. They all looked surprised, and even the teacher nodded with interest, clearly intrigued by the new summon. How peculiar. Hey, Gwen, how have you been? What's with all these snakes? Rusty rested his halberd on his shoulder after cutting down several snake-like monsters. He looked around and realized he was in a place that resembled the dueling arena, only much smaller in scale. Rusty, you're back. Where have you been? Gwen called out to him in a shaky voice, as if she were holding back tears. Rusty, on the other hand, replied cheerfully, happy to speak to a human without having a possessed head inside his body. Me? Oh, just battling some bandits and cultists. And I also started a blacksmith shop. As soon as she asked, he began talking about everything that had happened since he last left. His tone was quite cheerful, which caused Gwen to be confused. A blacksmith shop? Yet. It's not as hard as you might think, but those stingy merchants are making it impossible to earn a profit. Do you know how high their fees are? They're robbing me blind. His friend clearly didn't know how to respond to his non-stop chatter. She hadn't spent much time with Rusty in the past, but it seemed that once he warmed up to someone, he became surprisingly talkative. Don't think that this changes anything. As Rusty and Gwen were talking, their opponent, Eldrick, shouted from the far end of the dueling platform. He absorbed what mana he could and dispelled the few remaining small monsters around him. Soon he began to focus again, chanting as he summoned a third twin-fanged green viper. That armor might be tough, but it's not tougher than 3 of my vipers. Rusty glanced at his opponent and moved forward at a steady pace. He quickly analyzed the viper's strength and identified them all as E+ rank, monsters he could have defeated even in his previous form. During his last exam, he had been a creature of that same rank, and it seemed his current opponent still believed he was no stronger than before. Rusty, be careful. Gwen called out. Don't worry, Gwen. I'll take care of them in no time. Rusty walked up casually, halberd still resting on his shoulder. The 3 serpents hissed in unison, their bodies coiling low as if preparing to strike. Mana rippled through the air as Eldrick pointed toward him. Now! Tear that thing apart! The vipers lunged at the same time. Their bodies twisted and intertwined, scales scraping against stone as they closed around Rusty. In seconds, the 3 had managed to coil themselves around him completely. From the stands, no one could see his form anymore as only the writhing and shifting mass of green scales was visible. That armor is done for. Yet, even if that armor's tough, nothing can withstand that. The serpents tightened further, their fangs sinking into the steel body within. The faint sound of grinding metal filled the air, but Gwen's expression did not turn to despair. Instead, she looked confused. As Rusty's summoner, she could always sense when her monsters were taking damage, and right now, there was none. Despite the noise, Rusty's enchanted steel frame remained completely unharmed. That tickles, or it would if I had a humanoid body. Rusty joked, his voice reaching only Gwen. He decided it was time to end the fight. A sharp metallic sound came from within the coiled serpents, and suddenly a steel hand burst out, gripping one of the vipers by the head. With a crushing snap, the monster was destroyed, dissolving into mana particles within seconds. Only 2 remained. It didn't take any damage? How is that possible? One of the upperclassmen said. Could it be? That difference in power, is it a D rank? Whispers spread through the crowd as Rusty began his counterattack. He tore through the second serpent as easily as the first. Twisting his halberd in one hand, he struck upward and sliced the creature from jaw to tail. Like the one before it, the serpent dissolved into tiny lights until only one remained. And no, impossible. Eldrick gritted his teeth and pulled a mana potion from his pouch. After drinking it, he summoned another large snake to aid the one still standing, but Rusty was not impressed. Halberd in hand, he charged forward. There was no need for buffing skills against such weak enemies. For a D rank like him, they were barely worth the effort. With a single swipe, he destroyed the next serpent, and the last one met the same fate moments later. Do you see that? This is the true power of Gwendolyn Rainstar, the Maiden of Metal. Astrella burst out laughing as she invented new titles for Gwen, making her friend blush with second-hand embarrassment. The students who had been watching the one-sided fight began cheering. Even though Eldrick kept using potions and other support items to summon more creatures, they were defeated within seconds by Rusty's overwhelming strength. Soon, the crowd started chanting Gwen's new nickname, and the young girl lowered her head, pulling her hood up to hide her face. The arena fell silent as the last serpent dissolved into glittering specks of mana. The glow faded, leaving only the faint shimmer of Eldrick's flickering summoning circle. Before it stood Rusty, tall and unmoving, his halberd resting on one shoulder. He waited calmly, as if expecting another monster to appear for him to cut down. That's impossible. Eldrick staggered back, clutching the empty potion vial in his hand. His mana was completely drained, and the color had vanished from his face. He dropped to one knee, overcome by dizziness. You can't have. There's no way you can control something above E rank. Gwen said nothing. Her pulse pounded in her ears, and her hands trembled from exhaustion. The summon she remembered from before had grown even stronger. Each time she called him forth, his rank seemed to rise for reasons she could not explain. She could barely contain him in this world after summoning so many lesser living armors. However, what surprised her most was that he seemed bored. Was that it? Are there any other enemies to defeat? Or should I slay that human? And no, please don't. She shouted and quickly covered her mouth as she realized what she was doing. Communicating with her summon usually happened through their minds, but fortunately, the people around her were too busy being astonished by her victory to notice what she had said. Was that really it? No more opponents to fight? Gwen didn't know how to respond, as she wasn't sure herself. Eldrick seemed defeated, but the teacher had not yet dismissed the match. There was still a chance that another student might challenge her, since the one ranked above Eldrick remained. For a moment, she glanced toward the stands and noticed something unusual. Arania was gone. Where did she go? Could it be? She wondered, careful not to let Rusty hear her thoughts this time. Even though the teacher finally declared her the winner, she could not calm herself. Then, to her surprise, Rusty spoke again. Is that my next opponent? She feels stronger than the other humans. This might be more interesting. Arania had appeared in the dueling arena. Her gaze was not on Gwen but on Rusty. Without saying a word, she stepped onto the platform. The shield had already been deactivated after the teacher announced Gwen's victory. To everyone's surprise, Arania strolled toward Rusty and began circling him. What is this human doing? Asked Rusty without moving. The pale girl continued to walk around him, her eyes shifting between wide and narrow. It seemed she was examining him, intrigued for some odd reason. Lady Venom Ridge. I apologize, I've lost. Arania finally snapped out of her thoughts as Eldrick approached with his head lowered. She looked surprised, as if she had already forgotten about the duel. Thy efforts were commendable, Eldrick, but Gwendolyn Rainstar has earned her place at the front. From today, thee shall sit with Eldrick. Gwendolyn was taken aback by the words she heard. She had expected Arania to challenge her to another fight, but instead, Arania accepted the result and willingly gave up the desk area Eldrick had fought to defend. Eldrick was the name of the other youth who had accompanied her, and it seemed she was content for both of them to sit together on the side closer to the entrance. As Arania turned to leave, the crowd erupted into hushed whispers. No one could understand what had just happened. Some had expected her to challenge Gwen to a fight to determine who was truly the mightiest summoner in B class, but she showed no interest in doing so. Instead, the pale girl simply walked away, her eyes almost sparkling as she kept glancing at Rusty's metal frame. Haha, I knew you could do it. Waiting until the last moment to reveal your true power was diabolical. Astrella appeared just as Arania was leaving and approached her confused friend. Gwen still stood frozen in place, her mind swirling with disbelief and shock. Diabolical? That wasn't the plan. No need to be shy now, you won fair and square. And Rusty was it? Great to see you again. Astrella smiled at Rusty, who was still standing in the ring like a lost child. Soon, the two girls began laughing and jumping with excitement while he remained still, looking around in confusion. That couldn't have been it, right? Rusty had won his duel, but the outcome left him completely puzzled. He had expected a series of matches to follow his first victory, yet it seemed that was not the purpose of this mission. There appeared to be no more battles to fight, and before he could make sense of it, the teacher's voice echoed through the arena. Gwendolyn Rainstar, Please vacate the premises. Other students are still waiting for their seating duels. At this point, he was no longer sure what to do. Perhaps new challenges awaited him elsewhere, so for the moment, he decided to go over to his summoner. The rules of summoning missions were clear: if his summoner died, he would fail the mission. He also had to remain within a certain distance of Gwen, otherwise his body would vanish, and he did not know if she could call him back once he was gone. Rusty shifted his weight, his halberd resting casually on his shoulder, and took a step toward Gwen. The two girls turned to look at him as he approached. He intended to step down from the platform, but as soon as he tried, something felt wrong. His metal boot began to shift, and the mana holding it in place trembled as if it were trying to tear him apart. He jumped back instinctively, as though under attack, and raised his halberd. Gwen! He called, tilting his head. Why can't I move forward? Gwen's eyes widened as she saw Rusty trying to leave the platform. Oh, that must be because of the magical wards around the chamber. Your mana density is probably too high for them to let you through. For me to pass through? Mana density? What do you mean? He was deeply confused by what was happening, but he could tell that if he stepped out of the circle, his body would dissolve into mana particles and he would likely fail his mission. Gwendolyn, you look a bit paler than usual. Wouldn't it be best to release the summoning? Gwendolyn looked at Rusty with a tired gaze. It was clear that she was unsure of what to do. Isn't there any other way? She asked, turning to Astrella. The green-haired girl raised her eyebrow and replied in a surprised tone. Another way? I'm not sure. The only other option would be summon reduction, just like I use with Airy here. Airy, the small fairy, hovered around Astrella with a bright smile on her face. Rusty did not fully understand what the fairy elf human meant, but he could tell that this fairy was much weaker than the one who had cast supportive spells on him during the last exam he participated in. Summon reduction. Gwendolyn whispered. That technique allows a summoner to shrink their creature's body and lower its mana density so it can exist within the boundaries set by the school. Astrella nodded with a grin. Exactly. We learned about it at the start of the second year. You should be able to use it. Rusty listened carefully, intrigued but also a little worried. If what they said was true, he would not be able to keep his current form and would be reduced to something weaker, perhaps to the level of his F-rank frame made of corroded bronze. I probably don't have a choice. It must be part of the mission. Gwendolyn looked at Rusty as if asking whether he was fine with being weakened. It was clear that she did not want to cancel the summoning ritual after working so hard to bring him back. Summon reduction, let's give it a try then, Gwen. She nodded silently and began to chant. She moved her palms forward, closed her eyes, and a circle appeared beneath Rusty's feet. It was different from the usual summoning circle, and as it activated, a prompt from the world system appeared before him. Your current summoner wishes to use summon reduction. Will you allow it? Even in a situation like this, he still held control. Without his agreement, Gwendolyn could not force the technique upon him. He had no reason to refuse, so he accepted it. Once the prompt disappeared, the circle beneath his feet began to glow. It drew particles of mana from his frame, and soon, his body started to shrink. Whoa! What's happening to my body? It feels like switching loadouts, but not quite the same. His body was shrinking, even smaller than the form he used to ride Gleam. The halberd and shield he held also shrank until they were about the size of eating utensils. He now stood around 30 centimeters tall, and the two girls who had once been half his size looked like towering ogres before him. I feel strange. The change in size wasn't the main problem. His body felt completely unbalanced. His helmet was far too large while his limbs had become too small. Keeping his balance was difficult, and when he tried to take a few steps forward, he nearly fell. Still, he could move, and according to the system display, he could end the technique at any time. I'm tiny. Oh. Look at him, he's kind of cute now. His head is so big. Astrella said as she leaned closer. She poked his body lightly, almost knocking him over. Hey, be careful. He's going to fall. Gwen exclaimed, sounding like a protective big sister. She caught Rusty with both hands and lifted him up. Rusty felt helpless, as if he were a toy in the hands of two giants. His miniature halberd wouldn't do much good unless he aimed for someone's eye, and running around in this form would be nearly impossible. Are you two done? Before Rusty could get used to his new form, 2 new students appeared, ready for combat. Gwen gave a quick nod and moved forward. Only then did he realize he had somehow made it down from the dueling platform. The magical technique had worked, and he was now being carried through the halls of Mistwood Academy. His summoner held him against her chest, leaving his legs dangling awkwardly. So this is the academy. But what exactly am I supposed to be doing here? The mission description mentioned strengthening her position in the academy, but if winning that duel wasn't enough, what else is there to do? While he appreciated the new and interesting view, he still had no idea what his real purpose was. As he tried to come up with a plan, Gwen held him close to her chest and followed Astrella. The doors to the chamber closed behind them, and after a short walk, they joined the other students on the lookout deck. It's the Metal Maiden. One of the girls whispered. And her tiny metal knight. A boy added with a chuckle. The two laughed but quickly stopped when the teacher gave them a stern look. Settle down, everyone. We still have 7 more duels to get through. Once we finish, we will continue the classes. The room grew quiet, and all attention turned to the next duel. Rusty found himself being held up like a toy soldier with no way to escape. The area was protected by the same wards, so if he tried to return to his normal form, he would likely shatter into mana particles. The only positive part of this situation was that after his first transformation, a new skill had appeared. Summoned Creature Reduction. Active Skills. A skill that allows a summoned creature to take on a more compact form without draining the summoner's mana. Once activated, it functions as a passive ability and must be deactivated to return to the previous form. That's great, but this feels degrading. He felt powerless in this form, something he had never expected. In both previous missions, he had been the one giving Gwen commands and leading the way. Now he was in her hands like a baby, and after a while he began to squirm. Is something wrong, Rusty? Could you put me down? Of course. Her tone was as polite and apologetic as always. After a moment of looking around, he found himself being placed on a stool beside the glass window that overlooked the dueling chamber. There was not much space to stand, but from this higher position, he could actually see the summons fighting below. 2 people were battling, calling forth various monsters, although none were as powerful as the vipers he had faced before. As he watched, something small caught his attention. A creature half his size approached him. It was dark purple, with 8 pairs of legs, resembling an arachnid. Yet its round body and fuzzy hair made it seem harmless. Arania? Asked Gwendolyn as she saw the pale girl move toward them. The small creature was clearly her summoned familiar, also affected by the reduction skill and clinging to the glass as it approached Rusty. That's Lady Venomridge to you! Shouted one of the boys behind her. It's fine, Aldrich. The battle is over now. What do you want? Astrella stepped in front of Arania, Rusty, and Gwen as if she meant to protect them. Aerie fluttered beside the chubby spider on the glass with her fists raised, trying to shield Rusty, who even at this reduced size was still taller than the fairy. Arania's pale lips trembled as if she could not decide whether to smile or frown. She stopped a few steps away from the group, folding her hands neatly in front of her black robe. At first, it seemed that she was looking at Gwen and might try to cause trouble, but Rusty could tell that her gaze was fixed entirely on him. Does she want something from me? What's with that expression? Rusty had learned enough to read most humanoid expressions, yet he could not figure out what this girl wanted. He shifted slightly to the side of the stool, but her violet eyes followed his every move. It felt as though she was ready to pounce, though he had no idea why. Ahem. The girl cleared her throat and finally spoke. Thou have done well. You may take the seat by the window. After one last glance, she turned and walked away to the far corner of the room, the 2 boys following close behind. Gwen and Astrella exchanged puzzled looks, still uncertain about what the other girl wanted. Now what? Rusty was left perplexed. Time kept slipping away, yet he had no idea what he was supposed to do. It did not seem like this mission would be ending anytime soon. So this is Mistwood Academy? It's bigger than I thought. Rusty craned his small head, taking in the vaulted ceilings and the intricate stonework surrounding the academy. After all the duels had ended, he had been carried back through the school and into the classroom they had come from. He finally had time to take in the sights and realized that this place was much larger than he had expected. Please be seated and remain silent. Although he had spent some time in the world of humanoids, he had never been in such an establishment before. The city he lived in had no schools, and children stayed with their parents instead. Some, like the orphans he had taken in, learned only from him and from the world around them. Seeing an entire institution built for teaching was something completely new. I wish Alexander or a Burden were here. I wonder if they ever went to a school when they were younger. His gaze shifted to the blackboard, where floating pieces of white chalk moved on their own. He could see the flow of mana connecting to the person known as the teacher, and he immediately recognized that this individual was above D rank. Still, he could not accurately judge their true combat ability, since summoners tended to focus on mana capacity more than anything else. The greater their mana reserves, the stronger the constructs they could create. However, Rusty had learned that those who focused only on one attribute often had weaknesses, and Gwen, his current summoner, was one of them. Here, Rusty. Why don't you stay here for now? She set him down on the desk by the window, and he moved closer to the edge. She had been holding him for the past hour and was out of breath. During the duels, she had needed to rest her arms, since even though he was small, his steel body made him heavier than she could comfortably manage. With such low physical strength, Rusty knew that if his summoner were ever attacked directly, the fight would be over in an instant. Here? Sure, but, are there any more opponents? And no. There is no one left to fight. You can relax for now. I don't think there will be any practical lessons today either. Gwen replied with a small smile. She kept glancing at Rusty as if afraid he might disappear, but once everyone had taken their seats, the teacher called for silence and drew their attention to the board. Now that everyone is seated, I will remind those who are new here. This is B class, and you will be held to a higher standard from now on. Those who perform poorly on tests will be reprimanded. You will be given second chances, but if you fail again, you will be removed from this class and placed back in C class. Rusty had heard about the ranking system between classes, which started at D and went up to A. The better the class, the harder it was for students to remain in it. Once a student reached a higher class, they had to maintain a certain grade average. If their score fell below the required threshold, they could be replaced by someone from a lower class. However, there also seemed to be other rules that were never spoken aloud. He says that, but if you are a higher noble, you don't need to try as hard. You should be in A class, Gwen. It's fine, Astrella. I don't really want to be there. The two girls whispered to each other while the teacher spoke, which reminded Rusty of the situation back in Ferndale. Every institution had its own hierarchy that could not easily be broken. He had been victorious over Catherine Grandwell and her followers, yet Gwen still could not reach the same class that girl belonged to. Perhaps she was even being suppressed by them. The mission didn't say that I should get her into A class, so that shouldn't be it. Once the class began, Rusty and the other summons, such as Eri, were allowed some freedom of movement. The desk Gwen and Astrella shared was large enough for 4 people, so he had some room to move around. Even when he moved around, the teacher did not seem to care as long as he made no noise. He continued to look around as the lecture went on, but he still could not figure out what he was supposed to do. I don't really get what they are talking about, and that girl keeps looking at me. As the lecture continued, he could feel Arania glance in his direction constantly. The teacher with the monocle eventually started teaching and drew some magic circles on the blackboard. Gwen and Astrella were taking notes, but he didn't truly understand it. While he was versed in enchantments and could perform some magic, he had no knowledge about summoning techniques. Gwen's quill scratched softly against the parchment as she tried to copy the spiraling diagram on the board. The teacher's voice echoed through the vaulted classroom, and Rusty tried to listen. Now, as you can see, the distinction between binding and link glyphs lies in the flow of secondary mana streams. A binding glyph restricts, while a link glyph stabilizes. Both, however, depend on the resonance between summoner and theory. Even though he listened carefully, the lecture still did not make much sense to him. Still, he paid attention. His own armor puppeteering skill was not the same as summoning, but perhaps some of this knowledge could help him improve it. It was not as if he had anything better to do. He was confined to this place, and the only one he could interact with was Eri. The fairy could not speak to him, but she kept pestering him, buzzing around his large head, and reminding him a little of Gleam. This should be enough for the first day. The teacher spoke out, and the classroom grew louder. But remember, in 2 weeks you will have a joint exercise with the secondary B class, so be ready. Your competence will be tested. As soon as the teacher mentioned this, the students began to whisper. Last time we didn't do too well. Don't worry, we will win this time. We have the Metal Maiden with us now. I think you're expecting too much from her. Rusty wasn't sure what they were talking about, so he asked Gwen to explain. The other B class? What's that? Ah, there are two B classes, B1 and B2. We're in B1, but most people just combine them into one big B class. Interesting. But why are there two classes with the same rank? What's the point? Rusty didn't really understand how the school system worked, so Gwen continued as they walked out of the room. It's complicated, she said softly, her eyes darting toward another door at the far end of the corridor. From there, other students emerged, wearing the same robes and badges as them. The academy sorts students by ability and status, but when too many qualify for a rank, they divide them. The A class is reserved for the best of the best, and it only has one group. Then come the B classes, 2 of them. After that, 3 C classes and 4 D classes. Rusty thought about that for a moment and then spoke out. So it's like a pyramid. The higher you go, the fewer people stand against you. Gwen chuckled and nodded. Yes, something like that. The number of students per class increases as you go down. The A class has the fewest students, while the D classes have the most. Their equipment is also of lower quality. Rusty knew that his summoner had been in one of the D classes, but he had never seen the inside of the classroom. He imagined it to be a kind of social hierarchy, much like the city itself, where nobles stood at the top and beggars at the bottom. What are you two talking about? Oh, nothing. Rusty was just curious about how the classes work. He was. Estrella leaned closer to him and raised an eyebrow. You said he's quite intelligent. I wonder if we could get him to talk. An intelligent summon like this is very rare. Gwen smiled, clearly liking the idea, and as they walked, Rusty spoke up with an idea. That's possible if you give me a head. His words puzzled his summoner. A head, like a person's head. Yes. If I place my helmet on a deceased head, I can possess it and speak through it. A whole body will work too, but the head is the most important part. Gwen hesitated after hearing Rusty explain his possession ability. For a moment, it seemed that she was even considering it, but soon Estrella's voice snapped her out of it. Is something wrong? And no. Let's just go to the cafeteria. Ah, good idea. This was an entirely new world for Rusty, and whenever he heard a new word, he could not help but ask about it. Perhaps he had grown used to asking his guides for answers, or perhaps he was simply curious. Either way, Gwen was always quick to respond to his questions. Oh, it's like a big dining room where we can get food to eat. Oh, right, you humanoids need to eat. Gwen chuckled at his comment and continued walking through a series of marble corridors. The atmosphere began to change as the sound of many students talking filled the air. Rusty remembered how Gleam usually perched on his shoulder, so he decided to let Gwen do the same. From that position, he could see better and began to observe everything around him. This place is much better than the C-class cafeteria. Look at the size of those tables and all the options. Estrella said with a hint of joy in her voice. Everything was made from wood in D-class. They even have silverware here. It seemed this was the first time the two girls had visited the place, as they looked around with eyes full of excitement. To Rusty, it all seemed very different from the Adventurers Guild or any restaurant he had seen before. The people working here appeared much more formal, and a large menu covered one of the walls. What fascinated him most was that the plates of food floated through the air, carried by nothing more than magical spells. Oh, what should we get? Estrella asked as she studied the menu on the wall. Each dish was numbered, and there were 50 options to choose from. I don't know, maybe something simple. Gwen replied. Simple? This is not the time for that. We should order something grand. We finally made it into B class. Estrella declared, placing her hands on her hips with a triumphant grin. Her fairy companion, Airy, mimicked the pose beside her, puffing out her tiny chest as if she too had achieved something great. Rusty sat perched on Gwen's shoulder like a metallic toy soldier, his miniature halberd resting across his lap. When he looked at Estrella and the fairy, he decided to imitate them. He pointed forward with his weapon, which was about the same size as one of the silver forks in the cafeteria. See? Even Rusty agrees. Estrella said with a laugh. Gwen sighed but smiled, defeated by their enthusiasm. All right, all right. Something grand then, but I'm not sure we'll have much credit left. Ah, I almost forgot about that. Estrella and Gwen both seemed a bit saddened by something, so Rusty asked quickly. Credit left? What's that? Oh, right, you wouldn't know. How about I explain while we wait? The two girls finally decided on their meal, and as they waited for the dishes to arrive, Gwen explained the credit system used at the academy. It was not particularly surprising. Students received a weekly allowance to spend on school facilities and could earn extra credit by achieving better grades. Now that we are third years, we will be able to go on quests to raise our credit score. How about we do that once we have some time? Estrella spoke to Gwendolyn as the dishes filled with meat and roasted vegetables arrived. The mention of quests immediately caught Rusty's attention, and he wondered if this would help him finish his current mission faster. That's true, but we should be careful. I heard some people don't return from those. One of the void gates was unstable, and monsters of a higher rank appeared. Gwen said in a worried tone. Her words only made Rusty more curious. He had expected to hear about dungeons, but instead, they were talking about something new, a void gate. That did happen. Estrella replied, waving her fork as if to brush off the concern, although the unease in her eyes betrayed her. Rumors, most likely. You know how people exaggerate things. If it were really that dangerous, the instructors would have closed the gates. I hope you're right. Gwen murmured, breaking a piece of bread in half. Rusty leaned forward against her shoulder and tapped his halberd lightly against her collar. What is a void gate? Is it like a dungeon? Dungeon? Like a prison? No, it's nothing like that. Gwen shook her head and corrected Rusty. Void gates are rifts or tiers between our realm and the void dimension. Creatures from that realm gather in small pocket dimensions. If the monsters aren't defeated, the tier starts to grow, so the academy sends us there for training and resource gathering. That sounds like a dungeon with extra steps. What happens if the tier grows too much? Then the creatures invade the real realm and begin to cause chaos. It's a battle that never ends. For a moment, Gwen's expression turned distant, as if she were remembering something from the past. Ah, but don't worry. All the void gates are being managed. As long as the number of monsters is kept in check, they can't invade. You can also destroy a rift if you defeat the boss monster inside or even seal it from outside with the proper spell. Rusty nodded at the explanation and found these tiers quite interesting. Even though they weren't dungeons, these void dimensions sounded similar, especially since they both involved monsters. This world is more interesting than I thought. I wonder what's inside this void gate. He glanced around, taking in the familiar surroundings. This was his third time being here on a summoning mission, yet he still knew little about this place. It seemed he would be staying for a while, which made it a good opportunity to make progress. The Soul Forge granted him special summoning coins, and he knew that performing well would earn him more. Perhaps doing quests with Gwen would be the key, or maybe the upcoming joint class in 2 weeks. Either way, new battles were waiting for him soon. The moonlight poured softly through the rectangular dorm window, casting long silver streaks across the floor. The buzz of the academy had faded hours earlier, replaced by the steady rhythm of rain tapping against the glass. Gwen's dorm room was quite peculiar and far cleaner than what he was used to in his own world. The woodwork was much finer than the rough carpentry of his lair, and there was even something called a bathroom, a concept entirely new to him. He wasn't sure how it worked, but somehow they used magic to produce water and used it to wash themselves, something the humanoids in the city he had lived in never did. The level of cleanliness was far higher here, and he had not yet come across any animal droppings, which were a common sight in Ferndale. When the day came to an end, Gwen and her friend finally retired to a small palace. Humanoid creatures required sleep, but he did not. His summoner stayed awake longer than usual, mumbling to herself as if she did not want the day to end. It seemed she feared he might vanish the moment she closed her eyes. Fortunately, even after she had drifted away to sleep, he was still there, left to ponder his next move. His current form was smaller than usual. Magical restrictions covered almost everything, leaving only a few areas, such as the courtyard and the dueling platforms, where he could assume his true shape. I cannot leave her side. This is quite troubling. After a long day, Gwen and her friend had returned to rest. Estrella had left earlier, leaving Gwen alone with her summon. He stood quietly near the window, watching as his summoner finally fell asleep. She had lingered awake for some time, turning on her bed and mumbling softly, unwilling to let go of the day. Now she lay still, one arm draped across her pillow, her breathing steady and calm. He stood on her desk, gazing through the window at the academy grounds. Lanterns glowed across the area, and he could see both people and creatures patrolling. Even if he tried to slip away, he would not get far in his current form. Rusty tilted his head slightly as he looked at his sleeping summoner. She was completely defenseless, and while the place was well guarded, there were still points of entry, the window being one of them. Summoned creatures had many restrictions, but the ones patrolling outside appeared unaffected. It was also possible that people with other abilities might sneak in to attack his current partner, something he could never allow. Will she not get cold like that? As he considered ways to protect her, he noticed she had kicked away her comforter, a new thing he had learned about today. In the place he came from, people used only blankets or simple rags for warmth. The orphans who had lived with him once huddled together to stay warm, but eventually, he had been forced to get them a proper blanket and crude mattress because Alexander kept complaining. Rusty hopped down from the desk with a soft clink, his small armored frame landing neatly on the wooden floor. The rain outside pattered gently, filling the room with a soothing rhythm. He walked toward the bed and stood before the edge. Gwen was turned slightly to her side, and her breathing was steady. Part of the comforter had slipped to the floor, right where he was standing. Humanoids are strange. His metal body moved forward as he climbed the hanging comforter. In his current form, it was a difficult task, but somehow he managed to pull himself onto the bed. Only now did he realize how weak this minimized frame was, and trying to move the soft cloth was quite tedious. Why is this blanket so heavy? It was not just the weight. His small hands could not get a good grip, and his fingers could barely form a fist. He waddled forward, lifting one end and struggling to drag it up the side of the bed. The comforter bunched awkwardly, but after several determined tugs, he managed to pull it over her shoulder. There, that should be fine. He stepped back and looked at his work with a sense of satisfaction. Then, as he was about to return to his post by the window, a soft sound reached him. Rusty. Her voice was quiet, barely more than a whisper, but it made him stop. He turned his head just in time to see her hand slip out from beneath the blanket. Her fingers brushed against his frame, and before he could react, she caught him. Wait. He tried to protest, but she rolled slightly and pulled him closer, hugging him against her chest like a plush toy. His helmet bumped gently against her chin as she settled back into sleep. I can't move. Gwen, wake up. No matter how he struggled, pushing or pulling did nothing. He knew his summoner was weak, but in this form, he was even weaker. For several minutes, he kept wriggling, yet the only result was her holding him tighter. I can't move. I suppose I'll have to wait until she wakes up. His body was made of metal, and soon her warmth spread through his small frame. Rusty stopped struggling as he listened to Gwen's heartbeat, slow and steady. After a moment, he shifted slightly, careful not to wake her, and finally relaxed. Very well. I can keep watch from here. He was still thinking about his mission. Even though the summoned creatures were restricted, smaller ones could always slip through. The humanoids were vulnerable to poison, and perhaps a rat or a snake could sneak in to harm his summoner. Yet as the hours passed, nothing came and he was left alone with his thoughts. This mission is turning out to be extremely boring. Rusty, don't leave. As he pondered how to complete his mission quickly, Gwen began to mumble in her sleep. He didn't truly understand her struggles, but their connection made him share her emotions. When she was angry, his own temper rose. When she was sad, he felt the same heaviness. He couldn't fully explain it, but when she called out to him, he reached out and gently grasped one of her fingers. I wasn't planning to, at least until the quest is over. When he said that, a smile appeared on her face. Their time together had not been long, as he had only helped her twice before. In truth, this was the longest they had ever stayed together. The girl was weak and clingy, yet for some reason, he didn't mind. Instead, he felt a growing desire to protect her. Outside, the rain clouds drifted away, and the night sky revealed itself once more. The lanterns around the academy flickered brighter, and time continued to pass. The night had passed uneventfully for the most part, but eventually he found himself fighting for his life as Gwen tossed and turned in her sleep. Only then did he realize how big a mistake he had made, for she kept rolling around while clutching him tightly against her chest. Eventually, sunlight began to stream through the window, and a strange clock near the bed frame started ringing. It had a wooden crow at the top and the bird was giving out a chirping noise. Gwen twisted and turned for a few seconds before reaching out to silence it. Some kind of effect took place as she touched the bird with her finger. The sound faded and the girl finally opened her eyes. Hey! Her hair was a mess, covering half of her face. Rusty watched her glance down while still holding him with her right hand. It took her a few moments to understand what she was doing, and when she did, her face turned bright red. Rusty? What are you doing here? Can you let me go now? Of course. Gwen let out a strange high-pitched squeak and instantly released him, sending Rusty tumbling off the edge of the bed with a clank. He landed squarely on his back but felt no pain. His form was quite small, yet it still possessed a fair amount of durability. Once he was on the floor, he began wobbling and trying to stand, but with most of his weight centered in his large head, it proved difficult. I'll help you. Gwen rushed to his side and lifted him up, placing him back on her desk near the window. Once there, Rusty stretched his limbs a little and looked at his summoner, who seemed embarrassed by the whole scene. Are you okay? What happened? Nothing, I just tried to pull the big blanket over you, and then you started clinging to me, and I couldn't get free. Rusty did not attempt to hide anything, as shame or subtlety were beyond him. The young girl blushed even more for reasons he could not comprehend. I'm not sure what to say. I don't really mind, but maybe you should tie the blanket to your wrists if you keep pushing it down like that. He still did not understand the purpose of a comforter if it was not wrapped around the body. For some reason, she always pushed it away so that only half of her body remained covered. Please, don't mention this to Estrella. Do you want it to be a secret? Rusty was unsure what she meant, but her pleading expression was easy to read. Humans had many odd habits, and it seemed she felt embarrassed about the situation. He recalled that they sometimes mocked each other for small things, so he decided to agree. Allowing his summoner to be made fun of would also be an insult to him as her summon. Yes, please. Fine with me. So, what are you doing today? Is it the thing Estrella mentioned yesterday? As soon as she was fully awake, Rusty asked about her schedule. He had learned a few things about the school and discovered that today was a special day. Gwen and her friend were now third years and had begun taking on more responsibilities. Today, they were scheduled to visit a place connected to the void gates he had heard about the day before. Within those gates, he would be able to assume his true form, and nothing excited him more than the thought of going there. With sleep finally out of the way, Gwen hopped out of bed to get ready. Rusty still had to wait another hour for both of the girls to finish. He was not sure what they were doing in the bathroom, but it took more than half an hour. Eventually, they both put on their uniforms and headed out, with Rusty perched on Gwen's shoulder again. Rusty noticed something peculiar about this place. There was a strange diminishment of other races besides humans. Estrella was part elf and fairy, but she was in the minority. The dorm housed a few people, and he could see more students wandering through the courtyard. Most of them lacked the different shapes, sizes, or long ears he had seen in the place he came from. Still, he was more focused on the task ahead to care much about it. The B class had its own courtyard, and today their group was gathering outside. Dozens of students in dark blue uniforms stood in formation. The student he had defeated before was among them, standing behind a girl with a spider creature resting on her shoulder. Just like the other day, she kept sneaking glances at him for some odd reason. For a moment, it seemed she was about to call out to them, but Estrella stepped in and blocked her view. Finally, some action. Isn't this great? The young girl with green hair said cheerfully. I'm not sure. I think we should have a few more theoretical lessons first. Gwen replied, clearly uneasy about the situation. Today, they were going to explore one of the void gates for the first time without any direct teacher assistance. While they would be supervised, the spells that could save them from death would not be active within the tiers. If something happened, the teachers would need time to reach them, making this a dangerous task. You're worrying for nothing. With me as support and you as the main attacker, we will get the best grades. I'm not so sure about that. Gwen replied, but before she could continue, a stern voice resounded through the air. Quiet down, everyone. The teacher with the monocle was also there, the same instructor who had overseen their duels the day before. The chatter stopped instantly as his cold gaze swept across the B-class students. You've all been summoned here for a reason. Once everyone was quiet and paying attention, he continued speaking. From today onward, your training will take on a more practical form. Each team will participate in supervised Void Gate expeditions. These missions will serve as both your assessment and preparation for the upcoming inter-class competition. Some of the students, like Gwen, had concerned expressions, but most seemed eager to prove themselves. Rusty leaned forward on Gwen's shoulder, itching to return to his regular form and see some action. The competition between the B classes will begin in 2 weeks. The event will test your adaptability, and you will not be informed about its structure until the final day. Therefore, use this mission to learn as much as you can. It may be crucial later. Estrella smirked and whispered. Sounds fun, right? Fun isn't the word I'd use. As Gwen whispered back, their teacher raised his hand to silence them once more. This is a group exercise. You will divide yourselves into groups of 3 and then enter the gates. If you do not decide on your own, I will choose the members for you. Now form up. The teacher's command sent the students into motion as they began forming groups. Arania and her 2 henchmen quickly joined together, though she looked displeased with the arrangement. Gwen and Estrella, however, faced a problem. They were new to the class, and before they could even ask anyone to join them, all the other students had already formed their trios. Excuse me, would you like? I already have a group, sorry. Estrella frowned as she returned to Gwen without managing to convince anyone to join their group. Gwen was still a bit shy when it came to approaching new people, and soon the number of available partners grew smaller. Only one unclaimed student remained. He was leaning against a large stone pillar without making any effort to move, and it seemed that everyone was avoiding him for some reason.